Welcome everybody. My name is Jared Henderson, and I am a homeschool dad. My wife and I have 4 kids, ages 10 to 18. I've been working as a computer programmer for the last close to 20 years. But I'm also, like I said, a homeschool dad, kind of with teenage kids, and so I'm sort of exactly in your shoes, going through the same stuff that you guys are, except I kind of have this little superpower, which people think is a bigger superpower than it is, of like I'm one person who's not actually like intimidated by the tech, because parents are confused and overwhelmed, and they kind of feel like they need to be a computer programmer to master this. But that's sort of like one of the main things I like telling parents is like, I am the computer programmer. And I've actually, not only am I just like a computer programmer, but I went so far as to write my own parental controls app. And so I've been very low down, in the stack, like literally writing code that blocks the internet. But I've been down there, and I think there's important work down there at that level, but I don't come up from that saying like, okay, your only shot as parents is if you're super tech savvy and you're great with computers. That would be a very depressing thing to say, and thankfully it's just not true. And so I kind of, having done all this work, the biggest and most important conclusions I've come to is that what we're facing is not ultimately like, yes, it's a technical problem in some ways, but it's a problem with major technical aspects, but the like solutions and the core ways to confront and to be successful in this area have to do with parenting and courage in parenting and spiritually discipling your kids and relationship, and honestly just like a commitment and a mind shift and being awakened to this whole area and kind of like having eyes wide open and resisting the urge to stick your head in the sand. And so one of the things I'm really passionate about is saying like you don't need to be me. I know many of us feel useless with computers. They're complicated. We don't know how they work. We struggle even getting our own stuff working. And when we finally get it sort of working, they go and they release an update and they break everything. And we're like, I'm there with you. And that's not like the area that you need to be good at to succeed in this. So just kind of stay with me a little bit on that. But I also, I don't know, were you guys, some of you around on the Thursday night when I kind of shared my embarrassing story? Because part of it, if some of you weren't, I don't know if I'll tell that exact story, but like I will say that when I think about talking to parents about this issue, I kind of feel like I have 2 responsibilities. One of the things, I don't love this aspect, but I feel like I need to take a few minutes and kind of terrify the parents. And I don't worry about over-exaggerating the nature and the scope and the intensity of the human tragedy that's happening all around us with our kids. And some parents I think most parents kind of at some fundamental level know that there's a big issue with like the internet and with technology and all that comes with it. But we're at kind of different levels. And like honestly, like we need to have a real sense of kind of how bad things really are. And so we have to kind of do this unpleasant task of like, nobody likes to think about this stuff, or it's unpleasant, it's difficult, but like one of the things I want to do is kind of like, I wish I could grab every parent and kind of like grab them literally by the shoulders and shake them and be like, there is a serious and terrible thing that if we're not diligent and careful and attentive and thoughtful, then we're going to have major problems. And there are all these, like, I'm always grasping at like, how do I convey how serious this is? Like, do I look up the statistics on the internet? If you guys ever looked up the statistics, do it sometimes. It's a valuable exercise. The statistics on the number of just things like the largest consumers of pornography on the internet are children ages 12 to 17. The number of but honestly, I think the statistics aren't even strong enough because this is not an area where people like to tell the truth. I did a panel 2 days ago with some FBI guys, and they were telling this story where they were talking to a big, high school group, and they were just asking this question about, they said, how many of you have been solicited for a nude picture of yourself? And they said 90% of the hands went up, and he said, because they said, 9% more should have gone up. 9% more were lying. They said, if we understand what's really happening out there, 99% of them had been, and only 1% hadn't. And kind of like you see the parents like jaws open up. But that's how I feel about kind of like everywhere you look in this area. And they're just talking about that issue, if you've been solicited for that. But like the problem with, like, we can just take one area, like talk about sexual content and pornography. Like, it is so rampant and widespread and universal. When I look at the stats, I kind of say like, yeah, these are horrifying, but I don't know that they're actually even right. I feel like the guy's saying like, if it says 70%, it's probably 90%. And I can tell you, having worked in this like world for the last couple years, I've started to like talk to people and talk to parents, and you just sort of like tell people a little bit that you're in this world, and sometimes they just kind of like spew these awful stories on you. I was just literally at a wedding last night, and I mentioned to this old friend, yeah, I'm at this conference talking about internet security. She's a teacher in a public school, and she just started telling me stories that like would make you cry. And now, you guys, your kids aren't in a public school setting, so there's some aspects in which like there's a wonderful amount of like sheltering and protection that you guys are doing as homeschool parents, and that's great. And there's multiple segments of things that you are in a much better place just by homeschooling, but you don't want to go, oh, I homeschool so we're good. Like, that is absolutely not true. Like, you are in a better place, but it is still, I've told this story a couple times. I'm friends with a pastor who, just to give you like an example of this, this pastor was telling me about, he knew this young man and had a relationship with this young man who was in a group, like a 6-month program for young men aged like 18 to 22 who were preparing for the mission field and full-time ministry. So this is like a super cool group of young men, kind of like who in some ways, you're hoping your kids like grow up to be these people. And in talking to these kids, he found out that in this whole group of a couple dozen, every single one except for one of them had a near daily porn addiction. And that's just one anecdote, but like if you talk to the right people who know people and are become sort of the source where they feel like they're safe to kind of unfold to, these are the kinds of stories they have. Like, it is that bad. And I think a lot of times when I talk to like parents and dads, I can kind of, most of them I can kind of immediately get them like nodding their heads, like, yeah, that's probably true. And a lot of moms too, and not to throw moms under the bus at all, but I do find that sometimes with our moms, they aren't quite as like aware of the intensity and the severity of that problem, and that's not at all their fault. I honestly, when I think about that, I kind of blame the husbands and the dads. Not every husband and dad has been honest about, like, some of them are, frankly, a large percentage of them, even in Christian churches, are hiding a difficult and painful struggle of their own. And so imagine, like, that would make it difficult to be honest and even to kind of like help your wife understand what you probably need to do with your kids if you're struggling and you haven't like talked with your own wife, you know? And it's not our boys. I always say it's easy to kind of like talk about boys and porn and then think, well, like, oh, thankfully I have, girls, but like, I could tell you heart-wrenching stories about the girls too, and they are suffering and they are susceptible to pornography too. They can get deeply addicted to pornography, but they are hurting in multiple other ways too. And I was at a dinner party once, and I heard a dad. We were talking a little bit about internet security because it had sort of come out that this is what I was working on, and this dad said, "Well, we don't like restrict our kids' internet or monitor them, but we just really feel like we need to trust them to make good choices." And at one sense, you kind of feel like that's really awesome and empathetic and sweet, and what a kind and good dad. And yet, sadly, this man's daughter ended up getting into a world of online friendships that they knew nothing about, which is very, very common, and started exploring ideas that she should have never even been exposed to, and getting into questions and depression and despair and led to a suicide attempt. And that story is happening all around us too. That's not just like, oh, he pulled out the one example that's super bad. Like that's going on in homeschool communities, that's going on in public schools all over the place. Like our kids they're suffering, they're struggling. We're living through this like fundamental major shift in society. It's like the Industrial Revolution, where like the world changed. We don't always notice it because it's kind of happening in slow motion if you look at it like week to week, month to month, even year to year. But like something incredibly dramatic just happened in the last like 40 years, if you think about it. When I was a kid, I was lucky. We had an Apple IIc. It took floppy disks and like there wasn't an internet to worry about. This wasn't a part of the job of my parents at all, at least in the beginning. And yet just one generation later, like we are in this, and we are not doing a good job. And I don't say that just to like make people feel bad. Like these transition periods are difficult. My wife told me once about, did you know that in the 1800s, parents used to put mercury on their kids' gums when their teeth were hurting them from teething? It's totally true. You can look it up. And they just had no idea the horrific harm they were actually, like they just had this sort of new technology. Mercury and derivatives were easily available and like does lots of cool stuff until it, does some horrible stuff to you. And that kind of stuff happens throughout history a lot, especially during these transition periods. And I feel like that's how you want to think about the period we're in right now. Like we are, in 100 years, I think they're going to look back and say like, man, in the 2010s and 2020s, they used to just like give 8-year-olds like the internet, and it was horrendous. And there's this whole generation that like I think we're going to look back like we are lacking that sort of like deep generational wisdom about this because we don't have it yet. We're not there, and yet, what do can we just throw up our hands and say like, oh, it's not fair? It's like what do we do with that feeling and that frustration? We can, we don't. I sympathize a lot with parents. It's like it's in some ways it's not fair to us that this happened to us. Like we didn't ask for this to be part of our job. It wasn't part of our parents' job. And like if you're anything like us, just being a human in the world is complicated and overwhelming. And we're busy. And homeschooling takes a lot of time. And being married and kids and we got stuff on our plate. And our pie charts are totally filled up already. And then that's the point where we go like, oh, and on top of all of it, I got to deal with this like tech stuff, and like, yeah, I know my kids are getting to that age, but you see, we're overwhelmed, we're confused. Most of us go like, I'm not technical. I'm no good with computers. I struggle with my own phone, and I'm busy, and I know I should. I'll do it next week. Saturday I should be free. And we kind of just like. It's so confusing, it's overwhelming, it's unpleasant. Nobody wakes up and goes like, what I really want to think about today is like the dangers of, and so you kind of stir that all around in a soup, and then you add in some of these very understandable and plausible excuses like, we just feel like we need to let our kids make good choices, or one I hear a lot is, but my kids, so sweet, I could tell you a bunch of stories like this, but here's a story that happens over and over, and I have personal knowledge of. I know a single mom who gave her son, who was around 12-ish, a phone that even she had thought sort of was mostly locked down. By the way, these phones are actually really difficult to lock down. That's like another thing that you can ask me questions about, we'll talk about. But she had done some basic stuff, turned on the yes, I want it safe for my kids mode, that some of these knobs that the manufacturers give, and gave her 12-year-old son a phone. And luckily, a pastor kind of intervened and said, whoa, that's super dangerous. And she said, no, not you. My son is he hasn't even started thinking about that stuff yet, and he's super sweet, and like he hasn't expressed interest in girls, and like it's okay. And luckily, this pastor was persistent and said, like, no, this is really not safe. And ultimately, he prevailed upon her and said, look, just give me his phone. And finally, she got his phone and handed it to him, and he was able to show her in 30 seconds that her son had a months-long habit of looking at hardcore pornography. And that happens all the time. all the time. Like, so this pastor friend likes to say, you give a kid an unlocked cell phone, you are giving them a porn addiction, is what he says. And like, I think that's a super strong statement, but I think he's fundamentally accurate. You look at you can talk to anybody. Like I said, at this wedding last night, people were, and we mentioned this, all these stories can come out, and like, I told my wife on the way back, I'm like, yeah, you can't exaggerate how bad it is out there, right? So we've got to like grapple with this, and it's ugly. And yet like I said, I kind of feel like I have two jobs. I want to shake every parent and terrify them, and I care a lot about honesty, but I don't worry about exaggerating this issue, because like, how do you even exaggerate it? But then I don't want to just like leave you there either, because there is a lot of reason to be encouraged and hopeful, and I've got success stories I can tell you too. And I really believe, like I have this conviction that, again, the thing that's not lacking is I don't want to turn you all into computer programmers. I want to help you be intentional, courageous parents about this issue. I want you to like eyes wide open, wake up. And so the core of the answer, if somebody said like, okay, like what's the answer to this like technical stuff in our kids? I wouldn't say like, well, this app if you're on Windows and this app, like that's not the answer. The answer is we've got to look at that overstuffed pie chart and say, like it or not, this is the world we live in, and this is what, like, something has to give. This is important enough that we need to figure out what we can shrink and what we can pitch. I tell parents to imagine, you can get your kid to 18 or 19 or 20 and you just got all the courses you hoped, and they get all the programs that you wished you could have done, and yet you come to find out that they had been nursing and growing this, maybe if it's a boy, it's a porn addiction, or your daughter is struggling with XYZ, right? Like, think about some of these horrifying outcomes, and then imagine, would you go give up a class? If you could go back and trade one class for like them not having been launched into life with like a crippling addiction, to have their brains, when they're literally forming their lifelong desires, to have all this horrifically scarring content, like, you know what I mean? Like, what would feel more important? I had this, I've heard lots of stories like this, and again, they're so common if you just kind of start to open yourself up to it, but I knew of a family who's doing kind of in some ways all the right things, and they had a son who was a little bit older, and at one point he just like, they had their stuff locked down pretty well, but there was like a point in time where he needed to get past the like protections because of a school assignment, and so just kind of because like, oh yeah, I've got to do this, the things due or whatever, the mom gave him a password and kind of let him have some access, and then forgot about it. And about 6 weeks passed, and like they come to find out that sure enough, he's been using this access and this password for like 6 weeks and looking at porn. He was actually thankful, like ashamed, but thankful kind of to be like discovered and to be helped out of that. Like it's that type of story. I remember thinking about that story in specifically. I was imagining myself in the shoes of that dad, because my kids were a little bit younger, and I hadn't had any scenario like that happen, and I just like was thinking like that would be just such an awful thing to find out. And I said to myself, like, what would he do to go back 6 weeks and undo that? What sort of inconveniences would he be willing to undergo? Like, what's the price you would pay to undo that? Like, and I sat there and I thought about that. Like I guarantee you, both those parents would have said, let him get an F in that class. I don't care. They would trade the F for the lack of that exposure. You know what I mean? Like, and so I kind of had this feeling of like, okay, this is a really critical thing for you to think about right now, Jared. You're not in that spot right now, but you're gonna have to like settle it that this is gonna cost you time, and this is gonna be annoying, and this is gonna be frustrating, and it's not, there's no easy button you get to like press to like make this problem go away, but like it's so tempting to again, like, even that story kind of gives this example of like sometimes we get the right stuff in place and then the very protections we've put in place, they're frustrating, and then it's just easier to like turn it off. And we've got to fight that. We've got to say, so my wife and I kind of sat down, we had these literal conversations, and we said, like, we're gonna accept some inconvenience. There's gonna be a bunch of years, we're gonna have to do stuff like my personal laptop that I work on is password protected, and every time I sit down at my own computer, I have to type my password in. And I'm gonna do that for years. But it's like, you could say like, I don't wanna do that, and I don't either. But like, will I trade that for like kids coming out of adolescence with clean and pure hearts, without having, some of these horrific tragedies happen to them? Like, absolutely, I'll do that. And so that's how, because I'm as lazy as anybody else, but that's how I kind of motivate myself. And I think about that, and we've committed to it, and it does take time. It interrupts you. It's frustrating, but that's the very key to this, in my opinion, like the key to getting you like on the right side of this issue is to just kind of like settle it that you're willing for it to bug you, annoy you. You're willing for it to be uncomfortable. You're willing there to be situations that, and you kind of count the cost ahead of time and you say, it's worth it. I'm going to do it. This is part of my job. Something else is going to give. And that, once you have that mindset, when you know how serious it is, and you give up the excuses, maybe you throw yourself a little pity party now and then, but then you move on and you face it head on, then a lot of things clarify, because just having that mindset it simplifies things, and it opens you up to like a world of solutions that come just from the seriousness of it and your commitment to it. Let me give you an example of that, and I'm going to go through like a whole bunch of like stuff we ended up doing too in a minute. But just simple stuff, like I was kind of inspired by my older brother. He's not a computer programmer, and but he knew, thankfully, like how big of a deal this was, and they were struggling to find the right app for their kids trying to do homeschool, and they had one that sort of worked, but it wasn't everything they wanted. And so he just went out and he bought an $150 fingerprint safe. And he said, until we get something better and get this sorted out, we're going to have our kids do their school down in the family room and on the big table, and then at 5 o'clock, all the computers go in a safe every night. Wow. And it's like, I love that because it's brilliant, and that doesn't take, you don't have to be a computer guy to go buy a safe. And it's like, well, that's crazy. But yeah, it's crazy, but those are the solutions that pop up when you just decide, well, this is too big of a deal. I can't just go like, oh, well, the filters are hard to use. Oh, well. Like, if you do that, you got a super high chance of having your kid become part of this tragedy. And if you're not willing to accept that, then you just start doing things like, well, maybe they just don't have it. Maybe we do more analog schooling. Maybe we do fewer devices. Like, I've had a lot of parents come up to me this weekend and say, well, like, okay, this is important. I've got all this, like, I've got all these devices and these smartphones and these Xboxes, and they're like, how do I protect it all? And I say, look, I'm a technical guy. If you gave me that big of a problem, I couldn't do it. And so the answer is, it's so serious that you take a problem this big and you start by shrinking it down. And you shrink it down not with computer savvy, you shrink it down with parenting courage, and you say, okay, we're gonna throw the Xbox in the pond, And because an Xbox in a pond is not very dangerous at all, I say that because I actually have a friend who threw his TV in the pond, and I always thought, like, that's brilliant. That's one of the wisest men I know. I mean, maybe it was like littering and not good for the environment, but but still, more people should be like my friend David, who threw his TV in the pond. But those are like, this is a phrase I say, like, tame the technical problems with physical solutions. Use a safe. There's lots of physical solutions that aren't just like a safe. Stuff like internet activity, if it's after you've shrunk it down to what's truly necessary, then you do stuff like it only happens in public places. Like the really bad stuff needs darkness, it needs privacy, it needs, and for some reason there's this idea that once we give a kid a phone or a computer, that it's this like, it's their secret world, and they get to, and also they need their privacy, and you don't want to be one of those parents that snoops on your kids because you might hurt your relationship with them. And this is like this big boogeyman too. If you Google advice about like, should I supervise or monitor my kids, internet, you'll get all these PhDs and people saying that's not the right approach because you're going to break trust with your kids, and they'll try to scare you away from this. And in my opinion, that's just totally the wrong mindset. And it's taking this, like, I believe in privacy. Like, privacy is an important thing. I care about it. And with my daughter, who is 16, I had a conversation with her once, and I said, I respect your privacy, and if you want a diary where you can write your prayers to the Lord, write thoughts about boys you like, or I'm just imagining all the, your deepest everything, I'll go to the hardware store right now, I'll buy you a safe, I'll defend you from your little sister, and I will never ever look at that thing. But this phone, and then I held up her phone, I said, this is not your private place. This is a tool that I have bought for you, and everything here is, we're going to see it, we're going to know it. Her mom and I, every once in a while, we call it tossing their phones, like tossing a cell in the prison, where you go and you look for the shims. Or is that the right word? Not shim. Shiv. Yeah, the knives they make in prisons. Yeah, shiv. Okay, see. We're a little weird. But the thing is, the point of the story is not that. The point is, my daughter never had an expectation of privacy about her phone. It's not, and it's same with her computer. Like, that's not an area where she ever thought she was alone, because she should have never thought that she was alone. And if we set that expectation from the beginning, then the fact that we grab her phone and that I have software on her computer that lets me see what she's doing, that's not a privacy thing that she resents, that's just how things are. And she has areas where she can be private, and areas that, like, teenagers and the internet is not an area where there is privacy at all. There shouldn't be. And your kids won't hate you for this. Like, I was telling all these funny stories about, like, I like to kind of tell funny stories about how crazy we are with our kids. And during the FBI panel, Rachel jumped up and said, and by the way, his kids don't hate him. And, like, I forgot to say that. Like, we have a really good relationship with our kids. And part of this is we don't just kind of like do this from on high with like no context and no understanding and no relationship. We're doing this in the context of really frank and honest discussions and conversations about why this is important, and what these devices do to us, and what this content on the internet, how it affects our heart, and how it grieves the Holy Spirit. And we're trying to, at the same time, we're trying to model, we're not saying, you can't do any of these things, but we're just going to like go be doing all these things on our own without you. Then, like, they know that we're trying to live like this. Like, I don't let myself on social media. So when I say like, no, you can't be on social media, it's not like, Dad, you're a hypocrite. And I say like, I've found that to be distracting and dangerous and hurtful to me, and so I don't go there either. And so the whole thing's done with, like, I've talked to them about my struggles. I've talked to them about things that I did with technology, not like the gruesome specifics, but like of things that happened to me when my parents were clueless, and how I wish that I could go back and erase those things and never have seen some of the things that I saw. And when you're being strict and you're doing it in an environment where they also know why you're doing it, and you're also being loving and forgiving and merciful at the same time, and then they don't have to hate you for it. And I've seen like multiple families where the kids actually like totally get on board, and they become like they're on your side, they're an ally. I've had several times, I have my kids go, oh, I found something on my phone that I don't think I should have access to this, Dad. Can you, like, I think there's, and they bring it to me and they say, hey, fix it so I can't see this, or I can't get that, And that's awesome. And it doesn't have to be this, like, you don't have to choose between being strict and having a healthy relationship with your kids. And so just kind of like get rid of that idea. Like, don't take your parenting advice from the internet in general. Unless it's me on the internet, because I'm right and they're wrong. So yeah, like mindset is everything, honestly. Like if you can settle that one thing, stuff is going to start clarifying. And then shrink the problem space. Before I kind of get into even, I'm going to go through a little bit of just an example of how we are handling our family right now. The other concept I always try to share with people is, I use a technical term, I teach it to people, it's from my business, my world, it's called red teaming, being on the red team. So there's this idea that if you have like a product, if you're doing something digitally, you have a website or a service or something like that, and you're big enough and you have enough money, you actually pay really smart people to try to hack you. Because like there are people trying to hack you all the time and you want to figure it out. So you get the smartest people and you pay them lots of money and you say, come at my system, try to steal my users' passwords, and then they call that the red team. And then the blue team is like your internal security people. And so you kind of have these, you're constantly pitting the red team against the blue team, and it's far more effective. Like if you just kind of are sitting there and being like, well, I think I did this, and I think I did this, and I think we're good. Companies have figured out that it just doesn't work. You have to literally have people probing every part of your system, and that's called red teaming. And I wish every parent would kind of had this mindset, because I always tell people, red team everything you're doing with your kids and their setup. Like if you use an app, if you've installed a parental controls, if you've got a filter on your network, I love all those things. Use all of them, use a bunch of them, but don't just kind of like set them up and then don't test them. Like there's this other step that you want to be doing continually, which is, okay, I did the thing, I think I got the phone locked down, and now I'm going to put on my red team hat, because you can't pay somebody else to do this. Put on your red team hat and then sit there and try to break it. I had an experience a couple years ago, it was kind of formative for me, where it was early on, my kids were just getting into this age where I was more concerned, and I put like a network level thing on my whole system that blocked literally millions of domains. I got all the most up-to-date lists of all the adult sites. And if you were on my network, it's like literally I erased millions of domains. And I was like, this is so great. Like my home is secure. But I'm thankful that I said, okay, but let me red team it for a minute just to double check. And I sat at my computer, I turned off images in case I didn't want to see anything, and I just tried to break through, and I started Googling sexual topics and just clicking on every single link, and like the first 2 pages on Google, every single one was blocked, and I was like, this is awesome. And then I went to the 3rd page and boom, I'm on something. And that's because that touches on a couple issues. One is that like this idea of blocking parts of the internet, it's wonderful and it's good, I applaud it, and I think you should do it. I actually left that device on my network, I still have it to this day, because it blocks millions of sites. But when you're trying to block the bad stuff, it's a fundamentally, it's an approach that just ultimately doesn't work, because there's too much bad stuff and it's changing too much. There's too many sites, and the purveyors of this content, they realize that one of their biggest enemies is all the filters that parents are putting in, so they are incentivized to keep churning out new domains, new websites all the time. And so you can get lots and lots of them, and that's great, but like imagine you're a motivated teenager with curiosity and a sinful nature and impulses, and you might go past the first 2 pages of blocked results. And I mean, it took me less than 90 seconds to find something. And that's why, like, I don't think a ton of you were there on Thursday night maybe, but just briefly, I tell this horrifically embarrassing story about myself when I was 13, and I thought that there were some dirty magazines in my basement that I had seen a couple years before I knew what they were. And I went on this 3-hour systematic search, like with all this incredible tenacity and diligence that most 13-year-olds don't manifest, and moved every single ceiling tile in the drop ceiling in my basement trying to find that stuff. And I tell that story because you want to realize that even like I was a kid who went to church and I was a kid, you'd say, oh, he's a sweet kid, he's not going to do that stuff. But that's what I did, and I was super lucky that I was born in 1979, and all I was doing was looking in drop ceiling tiles for a Playboy. Like if this happens now, if I were born in 2009, I would have been seeing if I could get past your filter. I would have been looking in your junk drawer for the iPad you forgot to recycle that's still connected to the Wi-Fi. It's like our homes are full of all these portals, and it's not that the human heart has changed. Like, I did that in 1992, and if somebody in 1692 had access to that stuff, they would have done the same thing, because the heart is what it always is. But what's different now is just the access. It's just, there's these portals everywhere, and then it's worse than that too, because what you find if you get past our systems is you find this horrifically scarring intensity of content at this time when brains are developing and hearts are, like I said, are forming our lifelong view of what normal people look like and what sex might be like. And it just, there's a reason why, like, everyone but one of those young people had this addiction. Like, it's the type of content that's available is so it's so scarring and it's so intense. It's like, to use a drug analogy, it's like when I was a kid, I was sniffing around hoping to find a little, like, low-grade weak marijuana. And nowadays, when kids are looking around, they're finding, like, pure fentanyl, and a little tiny bit of it can kill you, you know? And that's kind of where we are. But on a tangent of a tangent, but red team your stuff. And so not just like your networks, your filters, like your apps. When you have this mindset, you're going to go like, okay, I have a phone, but my wife was just telling somebody that Bible apps allow access to the internet, and people were using the YouVersion Bible app to, like, get on YouTube and see, like, that stuff's super common. I told some parents, like, when you give your kids phones, don't let them have Apple Maps or Google Maps. And they go, why? They need that to, like, drive. And I said, well, yeah, because in both of those apps, you can find strip clubs, and you can click on them and see all the photos they post of them, and it's all there. And so, like, again, here I am trying to scare you, but that's the mindset you have. That's why you have to have very few apps that you've red teamed. And so to this day, my son just asked me if my 18-year-old son, who I still, by the way, I protect his phone and it's super locked down and he doesn't hate me for it. He asked for the Zillow app. It's a real estate thing. And I sat there for 7 or 8 minutes and I tried to look for, like, can I? And I started plugging in, like, bars and strip clubs to see if, like, because it's not that the developers necessarily, like, even meant that to happen. It's just they built it in such a way that, oops, there's this little back door. And so you gotta red team all your stuff. And so, okay. I'll go on to, let's see, how am I doing on time? Yes.
You said YouVersion, Bible app, Maps, and there was one more.
Google Maps and Apple Maps, the two main apps. I actually recommend people use Waze, because it's the one map app that doesn't let you see pictures. So, okay, those are some, like, core principles. Let me go through a little bit of, like, I'm going to use kind of my family as an example, not because I think we've done everything right, but sometimes I think it's good to have, like, you know, how did some family do this? Like, what levels of crazy should we go to? And we can sort of hold ourselves up as this, like, model of, like, part of this is just this courage to push against the culture and push against, and it's not just like the public school culture. I mean, like, even our people were talking to me about, like, phones and stuff happening at youth groups and stuff like this. We are swimming. We are in an ocean of this stuff, and so it doesn't have to be like this. And you can. I think the right approach is to be a little crazy in the eyes of the world, and it can work. So I'll give you a brief history of kind of some of the things we did, and then I'm going to describe to you our current tech setup in my house right now. So at the very beginning, I would say this is that we for a couple years we had some tablets, and when our kids were little, we did a little bit of movies, cartoons, games, stuff like that. Very innocent and very small amounts. But we came to a point at some point where we said we just cut all that stuff off too. Lots of parents are struggling with this thing of, like, oh, okay, I only give my kid 30 minutes a day, and I love that. That's a great approach. Like, we should not giving them unbounded time on these devices. That's super bad for their health and everything, and teaching them just to be consumers of content instead of, creators and people who know how to play and stuff like that. But one of the problems that happens if you get in that mindset of I only give 30 minutes a day, you set yourself up for years of battling as they want more. If they give you 30 minutes, they want 60 minutes. You give them 60 minutes, or you do the month off, which I'm a big fan of too, and then it's like, that's actually like a good way to strengthen an addiction, honestly, is sort of these intermittent, that's how there's these studies about the way you totally mess up a rat is you give them a button that you can press, and occasionally it gives them food. It's worse than it gives them food every time. There's some psychology about that. But anyway, sometimes my wife and I like to just tell parents, you just don't do any of it. Consider literally going to zero, even when they're young, because then you don't have to fight. You have to fight an initial battle of they're mad at you for a few weeks, but then they're not wondering can I have a little more? Can I have? They just realize that they can have none, and then you give them a glue gun and you give them a box of matches and you say go have fun, because let them play and let them hurt themselves a little bit physically with a second-degree burn. You only have so much parenting. I'm serious. I'm not joking. I actually think you should give your kids matches. We only have so much parenting capital, and you want to spend a lot of it on spiritual and moral things. And so, sometimes we do stuff for our kids where we're like, I'm not sure I would say yes to this. My daughter wants goats, but we've said no to so many other things. We're going to say yes to the goats. Goats are awesome. Yeah, goats are great. And so, just stuff like that. Consider going just zero devices. Your kids, you'll have a fight. It's just easier. Again, we're shrinking the problem space. And so we had a bunch of years where we just did almost nothing. And then they started getting older and doing more classes and stuff like this as part of their homeschooling. And then we didn't have the greatest, I hadn't made my own parental controls app yet at that point. And we had this period where we were thankfully kind of aware. My wife knows about stuff I did when I was young, and I've talked to her about those things. And so we did stuff our kids would come back from, they used to go to this class an hour a day, and they'd say I'm supposed to do a research paper on whales. And I have to cite 3 websites, and my wife's great because she's not afraid of everybody, and she goes, no, we're homeschooling, I'm the superintendent, and it's not going to be online, you're going to use an encyclopedia. And so we just say no, and in a lot of situations, that's totally fine, and the teachers are okay with that, and sometimes that works, and then other times it's, for a bunch of years we'd do the kind of things okay, it needs to be online research, and it's not in the encyclopedia, and so Rachel would go and she would find 3 or 4 websites for them, print them out, and then send them back to their room and say, here's your websites, they're printed out, go write your paper, and so you can, again, if you have the right mindset, you figure that out. And then there's a few occasions, I remember my 13-year-old son, part of the assignment was kind of doing the research, sort of, and so we didn't have super great lockdown devices at that point. And I remember one time Rachel just dropped him off at my office where I was working, and he just sat next to me and he did his research. And so we made a technical problem a physical thing, and we sat him there, and we had a computer that he could use that wasn't locked down, so we made it so it's not private, and he just finished his homework and moved on, and so we had a period where the technical stuff was sort of small, and we were able to kind of just put a few things in place like that. Also, this is about the time where I got the network level security thing, that the domain eraser, and I told that story about that, and so I put that in place. But I immediately knew okay, that's great to have. By the way, that's an illustration of something I tell people a lot, which is have a whole bunch of circles of, you want defense in depth. You don't want a single point of failure. I left the blocker, even though it only blocked 80% of the bad stuff, but I'm glad it's there, because if my central ring of protection might fail, I want something on the outside to catch them, and then if that fails, I want a third thing. And so you want to as part of the problem with all these apps, that they're kind of hard to use, and even the one I made, I always say it's not perfectly easy to use, and it might have bugs in it because I wrote it. And so you don't want to have this single point of failure. You want to have, okay, if this fails, it's okay because they're using their computer in a public place, or and so multiple layers of of defense is super good. So I left that network device on my system, but I didn't trust it. And then as my kids got a little bit older, we started, there was like homeschool classes that were really high quality that we wanted them to do online as part of what we were doing. And there's lots of nice resources out there like that. But that's when I said, okay, like we need them to have like, we have some old computers, how can we make this work? And that's when I went on the search for like, okay, what's the best app out there? And I called my older brother, he'd tried all of them. And he's like, oh, I hate them all, but this is the one I hate the least. And he gave me the name of it. And so I plugged it in and installed it. So because of my experience kind of trying to block the bad parts, I had decided that like, I want to take the opposite approach. The safe thing to do is to block everything. Everything's guilty until proven innocent, and then I get to pick the good stuff, the stuff that I allow. And there's only like a few, there are apps that let you do that. There's only a few of them. And I think part of the reason there's only a few of them, A, there's not that much appetite for that kind of thing. But B, they're super hard to use, and it's technically complicated to do that. There's some things about like even how websites are built that most normal people don't know. You think that if you had frogs.com and it's like super safe for your kids, you could just say, hey, let my kid on frogs.com, and if you unblock that one site, you'd think the site would work, but it only works 10% because in the code inside of frogs.com, it needs to go to like science.com to get its CSS and some CDN to get its JavaScript and stuff you guys don't even understand, but it only will halfway work if you unblock frogs.com. And so I was grappling with some of this stuff, but see, I knew all that stuff because I built websites, and so I had to go in and I'm using all these advanced techniques, and I'm sort of making this approach work, and this is when I just start to think like, my goodness, how does a normal mom or dad do this? I can barely do it, and this is my profession to know how these websites work. And but we used those like for months, and I just tried to put up with like it was error prone, the kids were constantly bringing me their computer. The only way I could unblock something is like by typing in their computer. Luckily I worked from home at that time, but they were also buggy and failed sometimes. And we had our daughter at one point just kind of showed us like, look, it stopped working, and if I wanted to I can Google stuff, and she came to us and showed us that, and that's fantastic. But I was horrified by that and said like, I can't even trust this thing to work, you know? And so that's sort of the genesis of the fact that I, at that point in my life, and this is a thing that most people definitely can't do, is I stopped and said, well, like, I'm going to write my own app and make it better than this thing, you know? And so I'll tell you briefly about that. Like So I made this parental controls app for my family, and at first it was just like, I'm going to make something for my family, and thankfully I had like the time and the ability to do it, and I got something whipped together in a couple months that I was happier with, and then my brother started using it, and it spread to a few families in the church, and that's sort of the beginning of the app that I call Gertrude. But I hope you can already feel that I'm not here to like shill my like app. It's super. I think it's like the thing I dreamed to have. I took all my frustrations and all the things like, why didn't they do this? And I wish it did this. And I want to be out on taking a walk. And I want to be able to unblock a website that my kid, and I like dreamed all these features because that's what programmers do. Is like, we always think I could make it better. And and so I made that for my family. But again, my passion isn't to say like, come and try my app. It's like, because not everybody has totally the appetite for exactly what we do, although I recommend it if you're up for it. But that's like, ultimately I care more about those kind of deep parenting things that I've been describing. But so this is at a point in our family where I literally kind of like went off and made my own app, which is not something that is replicatable for most people, and nor do I recommend it. But I did that, and slowly added like a whole bunch of things that like I made it so that I can see their screen, like it intermittently randomized takes pictures of their what they're doing online. And by the way, this is back to that whole privacy thing. This is not like hidden or snooping. When you install it and you turn on that feature, it says your screen is being watched and your keystrokes are being recorded. And so they know that I see everything. I mean, I don't watch it in real time because it just kind of piles up, and then in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee, I thumb through the pictures from yesterday. And the whole reason it works is I see it and they know that I see it. And this is true, by the way, of any, not just my app. If you're using some sort of app that gives you, like, some apps will send you an email of the websites your kids have been to, that's great. And I tell people, like, whatever visibility you have from your parental controls, whether it's my app and you can literally see what they're doing, or you just have a list, then what you want to do is make it a regular part of your dinner time conversation where you mention. So what I do with my kids is I go, hey, Dale, your teacher had this super funny red sweater on, because she has this online class where I can see her teacher. And then we laugh about it. But the reason I do that is so that she knows I actually look at the pictures. And so I'm like, I'm in your head, Dale. I'm there with you. And I don't even hide this from the kids. My older kids are like, you're saying that to remind us you look at the Gertrude pics. And I go, yep, I do. And so there's this level of kind of oversight and transparency about these non-private devices that we give them. And that's one of the things, by the way, that makes the awkwardness of the allow list approach that I was describing. See, I can, with the app that I made for my kids, I can unblock the stuff that they always use on a regular basis, the classes they're in every day, if they're on Khan Academy or my daughter's calc class or something like that. But then there's always these little one-off unusual bursts of activity. Oh, I need this for just a few minutes and I don't want to unlock it, or my teacher's going to send me to a link on this online class. And that's the sort of thing that causes, like, the parent to just, like, one time give the password and then oops, right? And so I ended up kind of realizing that once you have the, like, supervision and they know that I can see what they can do, I can actually turn off their filter. And we built this feature where the kids can go, like, hey, Dad, can I have the filter off for 15 minutes because my teacher wants me to follow this link with them. And then I get a notification on my phone and I say yes. But they know that I'm still seeing pictures. In fact, I have it set so, like, when I turn the filter off, I get more pictures, and they know that too. And so so that's one of the ways we smooth over this idea of, like, it's too hard to do the only safe approach is, like, the allow list idea, but it's super hard. So, but if you have, this is like, even within an app itself, you have layers of protection. So you have the filter, but then you have the supervision and the monitoring kind of on top of that. And so sometimes if you need to, you can disable, like, actually being able to disable the filter keeps you safe because it stops you from uninstalling the app. You know what I mean? And so we do stuff like that, and then I chat with my kids about it, and it's just, again, they don't hate me. It's like a funny thing, and they love Gertrude and they root for it and they kind of tease me about it and stuff like that. So that's where we kind of, like, ultimately got with our laptops. And so this is kind of where if I were to say, kind of like our current setup is we're not afraid of tech as a family. I'm a computer programmer. I've taught 3 of my kids to program. I'm working, I'm teaching my 10-year-old how to program in Rust on Saturdays. And, like, so I'm not like a Luddite. I'm not trying to move my family to a cabin in the woods, although that sounds wonderful too. But you don't have to, like, it's not this either or thing too. You can say, like, tech is great for what it does, and there's lots of wonderful blessings, even for ministry. But we've just shrunk it down, and we do lots of analog, we do lots of non-digital stuff. We didn't give our kids phones until we don't pick an exact day, and we try not to do it on birthdays, but, like, my son was past his 16th birthday when he got his phone, and we did give him a smartphone. I actually love these non-smartphones, flip phones, Gab phones, Bark phones, stuff like that. Like, because phones should be tools for communication, not for internet exploration. So when we gave our kids phones, they are incredibly locked down, no internet. I've had a lot of parents come to me and say, "What do you do about there's private mode on the browsers on their phone? Does your app fix that?" And I say, well, no, my app doesn't actually run on your phone. But the way you fix that is there shouldn't be a browser on your kid's phone. And like, that should be, in some ways, I feel like that should be obvious. But just even, again, our culture, we're swimming in this ocean of everybody's doing that. And nobody's thought, like, can you take the internet off your phone? Yes, you can. You can literally remove, like, Safari is not on my kid's iPhone. Now, these devices are difficult to lock down. That's why it's great to get the flip phone. Do that if you can, or get a Gab or a Bark. I don't have direct experience with those, but I love the idea, and I would tell a parent, get it and then red team it. Just double check it, because there might be some backdoor in those things you don't know about. But, so we shrunk our problem by waiting a long time to get phones. And the phones they have are super, super locked down, only a few apps, and we check them from time to time. I mentioned we toss our kids' phone, and that has worked really well for us. But then their need for internet usage goes onto computers, because computers at this point, like I've fielded so many questions about like, well, what about the iPad? But and iPads are great, or Android tablets. But at this point, like those environments not to get too technical, but for a programmer, those environments are kind of constrained, and the manufacturers and the software people don't give me, as the developer, the knobs I need to make those as safe as I want them. There are some knobs, and you should use them, but computers actually give us more control. So we say like, phones are for communication, and computers are for carefully monitored and restricted internet usage. And so we have a couple Mac computers. They're all protected with Gertrude at this point. But again, you can like protect them with, like if you can't use Gertrude, then use something else. That's great too. But also like practice all these layers of safety too, and relationship as well. But so that's what we have too. We do a bunch of like other things that are a little. We're very careful with passwords.
I just want to say something. You keep saying shrink down the problem. What he means is get rid of devices. Have fewer devices.
Yeah, throw it in the pond.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So just another thing we do is we're super careful about passwords. I could tell you horror stories about the kids watching their parents type passwords, learning passwords. When they get addictions, they begin sneaking in, and even if you say like, oh, I take your computer and I put it under my bed, we know parents whose kids will sneak in and take the devices from under the bed at night, and they know the password because they're watching you type it. And so we try to practice password hygiene. Basically, about every 6 to 8 weeks, we try to help each other with this. We're like, oh, we need to change all the passwords. We go through. It's annoying. It's one of these things we do that we shouldn't have to do, but we change all the passwords. My kids have been trained that if I need to come over to their thing and enter the admin password, they have to do this and look away. And they all do that. And like I remember my littlest, like when he was 8 or 9, he like the first time I had to type in a password for him, he was so proud, and he was like, he like got to do the thing he saw his older siblings do, which is turn away, like, oh, he's doing it for me, I'm so cool. But it's just, that's our culture, and we're careful, especially with their screen time passcodes. That's like that's the thing for if you have kids with iOS devices that allows the parent to like lock down the iPhone. Like I literally hold even though I love my kids and trust them, my 18-year-old son's like doing great, but I go like this, and I make sure he's completely not behind me, and I don't want to ever even give him the opportunity to be like, oops, I saw it, you know? And so that's the kind of thing that it's like you think like, oh, you're weird and you're paranoid, and like, but we just decided to just make that the rule and stick with it, so that like we don't want to have the problems, and it's not because we have bad kids. It's just because we don't want to have bad kids. You know what I mean? And so people will think you're weird, and they might look at you and say, well, we trust our kids to make good choices, but that's okay. Let them think that. It's not safe. We've bought some like Mac computers. Sadly, Mac computers right now I think give the most control. Gertrude's only available on Mac. We've bought low end, and I bought a used Mac for $70 on eBay that can run Gertrude. So that's kind of one of the sad things is like we don't have a ton of money, all of us, you know, and but we've bought the kind of like low end computers, and but we just kind of said like, well, we'd rather spend a little bit of more money to make sure we're safe. Rachel's computer has Gertrude on it too, which is kind of funny. So this is one of the things we do, is because it's out and the kids sometimes use it, and so I monitor her activity, not because I'm worried about her, but because the kids sometimes use her. So even that, we just, you know.
If they hack my password.
Yeah, or if they hacked your password. Yeah, then they know that. They know that mom's, because sometimes I make, you know, jokes about stuff I see on her, you know. Her pictures. So I mentioned this, but I like review their activity. I talk to them about it. We also have frequent conversations. We try to talk to them about the Lord, about letting the grace of God take root in our hearts, about feeling convictions for things that aren't right. how incredibly important real inward holiness and purity is, how much better it is to have a clean conscience. We spend a lot of time in our house reading the Bible together, and so that's also the kind of context in which all of this nutty craziness is happening at the same time, and that's not an afterthought. I really encourage you to, even if you don't know what to do, just start talking to your kids, start reading the Bible with them, be honest about your own struggles and feelings and prayers and things like that. We're also, thankfully, in a church culture, this helps a lot, where a lot of the other families are being really careful, and that's not true for everybody. So if you have a vector where a lot of bad things happen, is oftentimes you can get your own stuff sort of dialed in, but your kids' friends have unprotected devices. It's just when I was in the 5th grade, I had a kid at the before school program show me this page he had ripped out of a magazine at home. That's what we did in 1991. But now your friends' kids have devices, and they're showing each other stuff. And so what do you do about that? Well, don't give up. You might have to have some awkward conversations with your friends' parents, or you might have to say, if they're going to play together, they're going to play at my house, and I'm going to grab their kids' phones. And you even have awkward conversations with in-laws and grandparents, and all that stuff, it needs to be thought about, and you got to have some courage, again, to say, if you're not the type of person who is, if you hate conflict like me, then you have to kind of bolster yourself up and say, it's too important not to kind of ask the grandparent to not give the kid the phone, And then the other thing, I'll end with this, and we'll go into kind of question and answer mode. And the other thing we're doing is, as they get older, we are slowly loosening and granting more and more freedoms incrementally. And as they show obedience and faithfulness, kind of widening out, but still not. There's nothing magical that happens on their 18th birthday where they suddenly become saints and mature people. So don't fall into that trap either. But just keep widening it out as they show that faithfulness. Our 18-year-old son is doing great now. When he wants to use the internet, his phone, by the way, is still protected by me and still has no internet on it. And he likes me. When he wants to use the internet, though, he has Gertrude on his computer, and he asked me to turn off the filter, and I'll turn off the filter for the entire day for him. But I still see his pictures, and he knows that. And he's fine with that. And I have other families in our church where their kids have gone all the way into their 20s, and they ask their dad, protect my phone for me. And I know someone who, then they transition into these relationships with their wives, and my nephew had his dad helping him stay accountable, and then when he got married, he switched and asked his wife to help him with his phone, and they actually have a Gertrude account now, and he's married, and that's wonderful because these temptations don't disappear magically even when we're married too. But so that's just one of these hopeful success stories where they can you can, especially if they know why and they believe in the why, and they felt a little bit of the peace and the comfort of God has made us to want to be righteous, and sin, while it has a form of pleasure, it's an awful form of pleasure that brings with it darkness and regret and pain. And so even teaching them to we talk about that a lot, and so it's possible for them to kind of feel this and opt into these protections, and then you can guide them into these successful, healthy, hopefully lifelong monogamous relationships with normal-looking human beings. And so there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. That's some of kind of how we're handling it with our family. And I really encourage you to be courageous and do some of the same things.